Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December through the 5th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out the rock star lineup. This is now a technical segment. Paul decided to create a Python script to do stuff, and it's not done. It's never done. Like, anytime you create a script, especially the one we're going to talk about, like, you always just like, I can add this other feature and I can add this other feature. And it's kind of addicting. But I thought I would pause, put it out in GitHub, and let people kind of have at it and extend it for your own kind of usage. So it all started when intern Dylan needed a project, and I was like, we should find a Python script or some script to do vulnerability scanning. I had like this list of like projects and things that would make good technical segments, and we somehow stumbled across this script that in Python would scan the network with Nmap, do some default credential scanning, and then it used Bluetooth to send an alert to your phone. And we couldn't get that. Yeah, it was really weird. And then we couldn't get that working. And that's why I ended up with the Bluetooth adapter on my desktop layer, because we were testing that. That's kind of how that happened. Now I can use my headset across the streat because I put like a 9 dB antenna on my Bluetooth adapter.
On your class 1 removable antenna. Yep.
Yeah. So it's great. But I was like, Dylan, it would be better if we could send a Slack notification. And he was struggling with the Slack notification, and then I looked at the original code, and I was like, if you wrote code like this, like I might yell at you. Like that. This is a good example of some code that you should not write in this way. I said, so let me, and then I started down the rabbit hole. I'm like, let me modify this code, kind of clean it up for you, so you got like a framework to work with, and then you can work on the Slack integration. So then we just, we both got down the rabbit hole and kind of collaborated to create what I put on GitHub just today, in fact. So the first thing that we had to do was figure out how to create a Slack bot and create a Slack application. And this was a change in the way Slack is managing their API. Like, you should just be able to create, I think, a key. Like, they actually removed like a bunch of that functionality. Like, basically to interact with your Slack channel, you got to create an app. So I'm like, all right, fine, I'll create an app. So you go to api.slack.com/apps. Has anyone done this before? Is this like old news to any of us? It's a really useful thing.
You should keep going.
Yeah,
but the avatar for your network scan bot is terrifying.
You like, it's me in like a clown wig.
As I said.
Yeah. So I went ahead. I created a new app. It was really easy. Using the Slack interface, create a new app. And then reading some API documentation about what I should do next to get the appropriate keys. I like Slack's approach to this, in that when you create an app, by default, it has no permissions to do anything. And so we wanted this information to go to a private channel as well, which creates some other things that you have to do to make that happen. Because if I'm enumerating vulnerabilities in my network, such as default usernames and passwords, which we did, I did adjust it. Well, it wasn't default. Like, I put in some commonly used passwords that we shouldn't be using on the network, and it was able to log in. You want that information to at least go to a private Slack channel. Like, it's not the greatest security. So you have to give it a specific permission to send a message, and then generate a token based on that scope. And I didn't, did I show you the screenshot? Yeah, so I did. So you have to give your app specific permissions. And
Jesus, so that is terrifying.
Yeah, you like my icon, my app icon is a picture of me.
I told you.
Yes.
I told you.
I wanted to choose something that we would pay attention to, because it's telling you about vulnerabilities in your network, right? So you create this specific app level token in app level permissions for your app, and I needed it to be able to write to a channel, and so that's the app permissions that I gave it. And so once you do that, you go into OAuth in and permissions in your Slack management, and you can view the OAuth tokens, and you want the bot user OAuth tokens. So there's permissions that your bot can do channel level stuff, and then there's permissions for user level stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't want my bot to do anything with like collecting stuff about users. Like, I just wanted to post a message to a channel. And then to do that, you need your bot user OAuth token, which those tokens, because it can be kind of confusing because you can create, OAuth tokens for different things. Those tokens start with XOXB, and then the rest of your token.
Why did I just try to click on the copy button?
Yeah, right.
Damn it! Damn it!
Yeah, but what's nice is, even if this token were to leak, this token would only grant you access to post messages to one specific channel in our Slack channel. So it's a really nice kind of role-based, very granular level of permissions in Slack. But again, you got to read through the documentation, and hopefully this saves you a little bit of time. If you've never I had never set up a Slack bot or interacted with the Slack API before. So a little bit of research, hopefully summarized in the first few slides. So I do link to the original GitHub that I took this code from originally to come up with the code that we have today. This particular GitHub, and I thank the user for posting it because it sparked an idea. I think it's the essence of open source, right? We looked at his code and we got new ideas and we started extending it. And I think it's one of the beauties of open source. He did archive this particular GitHub thing, so I don't think he's actively developing it anymore. It is MIT licensed, so everyone can take this code and extend it. Anyone can take my code and extend it. Totally fine. Pull requests, whatever you want to do with this code. I'm just putting it out there because hopefully it helps maybe pen testers, right? Maybe you want to drop this, on the network that you're doing a pen test on and scan it and get notifications via Slack. Could be interesting. I'm using it on the local network to go put it on a regular schedule, like every day, a couple times a day, scan my network, tell me about devices or systems that are on my network that have like ridiculous passwords, right? So I also, one of the things I need to do, you see the first function that we created here is called post message to Slack. Very, very simple. I mean, this was copied and pasted from another blog post somewhere. I added the exception handling to it because the original one didn't, and I'm a big exception handling kind of person because mostly I write really bad code that triggers exceptions, and I like to have those. So I did make that modification. But also you should, when you put this in production, think about where you want to store that Slack token specifically and make sure that's stored in a secure place. Make sure that you're using some kind of password vault or secrets vault rather, or at least using an environment variable that you're obscuring that from the code. I have it in the code above that. It's hard coded in a variable. Not the way to do it once you go into production. So I fully intend on changing that moving forward. So I create a very simple function. Like it sends
they're written down in your sprint. I mean, this is Agile, right?
This is Agile. Yeah, I'm going to do it. Next week, I'm going to do a sprint. So it's very simple. Sends a post request to the API endpoint chat.post message. You can read the documentation for that particular API endpoint. It gives you a lot more options than you see there. And I give it my Slack token. I give it the Slack channel. Now, the thing with the Slack channel is you can give your bot permissions to post to any public channel, but if it's a private channel, you have to go into the Slack channel. You have to go to apps and you have to add your app into that channel. Otherwise, you're going to get a channel not found message or unauthorized or some such message like that. So make sure once you create your app, you add your app into that channel. I should have put a screenshot in there of that. I don't think I did. But it's really easy. You go into the details of the channel, you go to apps, and you say, hey, put the app I just created inside this channel. It'll add it just like you would add a user to a Slack channel. Then you give it the token, the Slack channel, the text, and you can specify, actually, my username is wrong. That should be Slack_username. But you give it the emoji, the username, and that's how you post a message to Slack. I mean, literally, it's that one block of code to get a message into a Slack channel. So that was pretty cool. I like that. Then, as the code is scanning the network, if the vendor string from your Nmap scan, and I'll show you that, matches a certain vendor, it will then send an HTTP request. Now, one of the things that the script does by default when it sends this HTTP request to a particular device is it only uses basic auth or digest auth. So like I had, you'll see the example, there's some Cisco switches on the network that had the web interface enabled, which enabled me to test this because it prompts for basic authentication and the script is able to log in. So very simply, it sends a GET request to an IP and a URL location with those auth methods. It tries both basic and digest auth. If we get a response okay, which means we logged in, we give the success message. Otherwise, we return nothing. Now, one of the things that Dylan's actually working on right now is I want it to be able to identify the web applications that prompt for a username and password, like in the actual web application, not just limiting obviously to basic authentication. Not everything uses that. Like for example, I showed him we have Apache Guacamole on the network.
Holy guacamole.
So what I was showing intern Dylan how to do today is get Burp Suite or Postman, use that as an interceptor. I'm like, go log in to Apache Guacamole. It doesn't even have to be a successful login to see how it posts that authentication request to the web application. Then we'll build that into the code so we can go detect, hey, port 8080 is open, build a test to say, is that Apache Guacamole? And then go try and log in with the default passwords there, right? So like my kind of vision is to use this as a quick and dirty thing for like things you're observing on your network. Try the defaults to log in. Send me a Slack message if you find that, because that's something I probably want to fix right away. So that's the HTTP portion. Now, I also built in an SSH login as well, because I really liked the feature when I did OpenVAS. I really liked that OpenVAS would find some default SSH usernames and passwords. And I'm like, I don't want to run a custom vuln scan or run the vuln scanner. I mean, I do want to do that, but like I just want something running all the time. And I've got like a handful of SSH credentials that I want to test on specific devices that I want to run inside the script. So Paramico, is that the SSH library? I didn't put my imports in there. I think it's called Paramico. I Google searched for Python SSH library, found one that I liked, I believe it's called Paramico, and ended up writing this function for SSH login. Obviously, it's pretty basic, right? Target IP, target port, username, password. I don't like it is Paramico. I don't like how I had to accept all of the host keys by default. Like the documentation says that's not the greatest way to secure it. There are other ways to configure this where you can give it an SSH keychain and host key file so that it will only test hosts that you've logged into before and stuff like that. But for testing purposes, I was like, look, just auto add whatever key comes back from the target. Just add that into your keychain and move on with life. Try and log in. Again, if I don't get a successful login, I just return nothing. If I get something, I return a message that we were able to successfully log into something. So I'm testing SSH in two different ways, which I'll show you for Ubiquiti devices and for Raspberry Pis, for the default Raspberry Pi, which is what OpenVAS discovered on the network, which thankfully, using the script, I was able to verify that I had actually fixed all of my Raspberry Pis and removed the default credentials from all of them. There's a neat little function there that gets the current IP address of the current network interface, in which you'll see in the code, the code uses that to derive the subnet to provide to Nmap to do the scan. So this will scan the local subnet and do that automatically without the user having to provide that. This is some of the logic in the actual network scanning function. Again, it gets the network subnet CIDR mask for the locally running subnet. You provided a short list of ports. I think I only added 80, 80, and 22 to that list. So it's just a few different ports. It instantiates the Nmap port scanner. It runs the Nmap scan. Now, what will happen here is when you run this Python script, since this particular Nmap scan will require root privileges, it'll ask you for your sudo privileges. There's a way to tune that in the Nmap library as well. But this, sudo equals true will basically say, if I run it and the Nmap scan requires root privileges, ask the user for their sudo password. Then one of the weird things this script did was it did with open a file as sys.standardout and then use print statements to get the output of those print statements into the file. I think Joff, I don't know if Joff and I were talking about this on air or not.
What?
Yes. And Joff's like, are like some really rare use cases where you might use that in a C2 infrastructure if you want to capture stuff that's going to standard out and save that. But for the purposes of this script, it was an opportunity to talk about lists and dictionaries and proper Python data structures for storing this data. So I completely changed this part of the code from line 111 on. And really all I did was I created a list called host list. And then when I got into my for loop, so for each host in the list of hosts that came back from the Nmap scan, I create a dictionary. And dictionary is just a named list of data, right? So I create a dictionary where I store the IP address, the host name, the vendor, a list of open ports, and a list of vulnerabilities for each host. So as I go through the results of each host, I take the artifacts from the Nmap scan, I save it to the dictionary, then I save that dictionary to the list, so I end up with a list of dictionaries, which contains all of my vulnerability scanning results. I also had a great appreciation for how difficult it is to write a network vulnerability scanner. As you think about making this more advanced, I was like, there's a lot to this, right? And this is just a quick and dirty script. Questions up to this point?
You could have dumped flan in there, couldn't you?
I did cover flan scan. It's how I say it, right?
Flan scan
is some neat wrappers. We covered it on other segments, Josh, certainly.
Yeah, but you could have put it in here is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I could, I could merge those libraries. Certainly, I mean, because flan is just a bunch of Python scripts that
on top of Nmap. Yeah, exactly. So if you've already got Nmap in there and dump flan, and you can get. I was just saying, it'd be interesting.
But it's a great point because the advantage with flan is I get HTML results to store. And that code's already
think about that. That's
the code's already written for me because it's a pain in the butt to get HTML from Nmap. But flan is a really nice project for doing that. That's a great idea, actually.
So you're welcome. I've just made your life miserable for another week.
Yeah, right. It's more coding. I like coding. So at this point, go ahead, Lee.
Are you using Nmap for any more than just as a discovery tool? You're doing the actual testing with the
That's
the
correct.
script?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay,
Nmap is just scanning the network, getting all those results. And then the reason why you'd want the Python code, I mean, you probably could make Lua plugins to do this as well, is I'm looking for a specific vendor or device type. And then based on that device type, I'm trying to log in with specific credentials. A lot of as you guys know, like a lot of the tools and scripts out there today are just brute forcing like a bunch of default passwords against every single device on the network.
Yep.
It's really hard to find something like small, light, and portable that's going like, wait, if it's a Raspberry Pi, try the default Raspberry Pi credentials, and if once you find it or not, move on and go to the next one. And this original script had like a bunch of vendors in there that had specific default usernames and passwords that they were testing for. So I just built upon that.
Okay.
So at this point in the code, we're trying to get the vendor string. And so the vendor string, what they're doing in line 129 is grabbing that vendor string from the MAC address. So whatever the MAC address says the vendor belongs to is how they're determining who the vendor is. I also added some code where, based on the OS fingerprinting results, so lines 132 through 139 is my code where I'm digging through the OS fingerprinting results which contain the vendor of the device based on the operating system type. So I dug into the Python Nmap library and kind of figured out how to do that. And there's some gymnastics in there to get at that data. So if I don't get the vendor string from the MAC address, I try and derive that from the OS fingerprinting results, and then I save off the vendor. I then, in lines 144 through 158, I don't think I modified much of this code. This was probably from the other project, saving only the open ports. I changed where the data was stored, right? Basically, I'm storing it to an entry in my dictionary rather than printing it out to the screen. I added vendors to the vendor list, and then I go through the vendor list and I compare the vendor that we got from the scan with the vendor that's in the list. If there's a match, I then call the HTTP request or the SSH login function. I try my default credentials, and if I get something back, I save that to the entry in my dictionary for my vulnerability or vulns field. And so these are the ones that I specifically added. So I added an entry for Cisco. So if it finds a Cisco device and it is listening on port 80 on the default web interface, I try and log in, with one of my passwords that I set to some of my Cisco switches, which I know I need to change now, right? The default is usually admin Cisco. So, that'll be, what I put in the script that's in the GitHub repository is just admin Cisco. One of the other things I want to add to this script is the ability to create a custom dictionary based on vendor. So have a CSV file that's like, if it's Cisco and it's listening on this port in this service, then try these sets of credentials and put that in a separate file so I can populate that file, then have the code just read that file and send that off to all the devices that are discovered.
You might also want to spell ubiquity correctly.
Did I spell it wrong? Oh, yeah, it's an I. You're right. I did. I spelled it wrong. I got the default password is UBNT,
yep.
UBNT.
Yep.
Yes.
I don't know if that's referenced anywhere else as far as
I don't think
something
so.
else. So just because you might end up with some false negatives,
right?
If it were that way,
right? Oh, actually, I did I? No, I would. You're right. It wouldn't match.
Would match.
It wouldn't match.
Yep. Pull request incoming.
Pull request incoming. So yeah, those are the ones that I added.
Put a ticket in.
Yes, Larry, very astutely found that I spelled ubiquity wrong, which means it might not test because it might not match the vendor list. Did I spell it wrong? Did I not even put it in the vendor list? Yeah, I didn't even put it in the vendor list. Oops.
So it
never tests for ubiquity.
Problem solved.
Problem solved. I'll fix that in the next version.
Modern problems require modern solutions.
That's right. So this is the portion of the code that calls a network scan. It saves the list of dictionaries that's returned from network scan to another list. And then I go through that list. I print each of the entries out to the screen, to a file, and then only if I got vulnerabilities back do I send that message to Slack. So only the entries that I indicated have vulnerabilities get sent to Slack. So if I'm monitoring that Slack channel, I only want to see messages in there like, I've got a vulnerability that needs attention. And that's what it looks like when it gets sent to Slack. It could be prettier, but I mean, for IT security folks monitoring the Slack channel, like, that IP address and that host name, there's that vendor, it's listing on those ports, and it's what I was able to log in with basic authentication. I need to go fix something.
I mean, it could be prettier, but you'd have to change that the icon.
Yes, the icon is yes.
Sorry, Lee.
So I was wondering, are you listing only the ports that it's got a vulnerable login on, or are you just listing on everything it answered on, and then you just exercise to the user to figure out which one had the bad password?
Yes, that is one modification I need to make, is to indicate which port the vulnerability was found. I am listing all ports that were found to be open, which you could also say the fact that port 23 is open is probably a vulnerability. And you probably also need to disable telnet on those switches as well.
Yeah, well, as long as it fingerprints as telnet, yes, absolutely.
I can tell from the message.
That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and again, it was an exercise to do some quick and dirty stuff to find the quick and dirty things on the network that might need attention. So I also want to modify the script so that it stores the previous results and tells me about any new systems that have joined the network and sends that to Slack. Because I think that would be an interesting thing to monitor. On larger networks, that could get very noisy, of course. But smaller branch offices, certainly, like you think about a bank or small office here, like new things that come on the network shouldn't, be in large numbers, right? Or if something new comes on the network, I might want to know about it.
How about detecting changes in your SSH host keys? I mean, those don't change very often, or do they anymore?
Ooh, I wouldn't think they should.
They shouldn't.
I'm thinking, what if something showed up trying to be an imposter?
Yeah, no, that's very doable to the script. And I need to work on the host key aspect of the script as well. But yeah, like if I run the scan again, and the previous run had the same host key, but the second run, same IP address, same MAC address, but I've got a new host key, like, that could be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to flag as well is, if the IP and MAC address are the same, but maybe it's a different host, if the vendor changes, in other words, like I might want to know about that. Like someone rebuilt a system or reused an IP. It's not a new IP on the network, but that same IP with that same MAC address now just went from CentOS to Ubuntu, like someone rebuilt a system and put a different OS on it, is another interesting thing to identify. I think that's it. Oh no, this is the results that get printed to the screen as well. So this is the raw dictionary that results from that I built from the Nmap scan that I've heavily tried to obfuscate.
Nice.
So it's pretty cool.
Oh.
Pretty fun exercise to, keep building on and make something useful that just tells me about stuff that might need attention on the network in a very, kind of quick and dirty way.
That's going to be a really noisy Slack channel, but it's a cute little utility, man.
Right. For our network, hopefully not too noisy. If you were to deploy this on a really large network, yeah, it could get interesting. Although if you limited it to just stuff you can actually log into, Adrian Sanabria did tell me about, he's advising a startup that has created a product for this, right? That basically does something like this. Also, I think that HD Moore's Rumble may do some of this as well. I don't know if Rumble tells you. I think it does tell you about easily guessable and default passwords. I want to say Rumble does some of this too. Or could at least easily be extended to do some of this functionality. But I thought it was fun to implement in Python ourselves.
Well, this is really cool. How are you? Do you have a database or other table of default passwords that, or are they hard coded or what? I mean, I was thinking, could you add a module that goes and looks up somewhere to find sources of default passwords?
Yeah, I was kind of designing it as these are passwords from the user, because I always had this thing about network vulnerability scanners. I always wanted the feature, because I always feel like there are a set of passwords for classes of devices or systems that they aren't the defaults from the vendor. They aren't necessarily easily guessable, but there are those passwords that you've used for a long time, and you've sat down as a group. I went through this with the network team at university, because I'm guys, we have this password and we've been using it for a really long time, and they even agreed even before I kind of called them out on it. They're like, yeah, we're getting away from using this password. We switched over to a TACAX system, and we've tried to remove it from all devices, but we're not sure, or something could be reverted to a previous backup and implement that. And I always wanted this way to go, here's 5 passwords for Cisco devices, or 5 sets of credentials for Cisco devices that we've used in the past that we've agreed should not be used on any devices. But I want to make sure. I want to, scan my network all the time and make sure these never reappear. Like maybe someone resets a password or deploys a new device and, uses giraffes as the password for, and I'm like, guys, that's when we phased out 3 years ago. We should never be using that ever again. And this script would find that. I always wanted that feature in network vulnerability scanners, which I think is why I was kind of so enamored with this little script to kind of just do it ourselves.
I did my good open source, at least a little bit of hero work, and I opened 3 issues.
Oh, thanks. Awesome.
Now, if you only had like GitHub updates and issues opening, posting to a channel in Slack, that'd be awesome,
right? As you can tell, I did very little configuration. Like I basically put the GitHub repository. I put one file in it, and I did.
Don't worry, there's an issue that says create a readme.md.
Yeah. No, so you can go to github.com/security weekly. I'm going to be working on sprucing that up. There's a couple of other projects there based on some other technical segments that we've done in the past. So one of the things we'll be working on is making sure all of the scripts that I've talked about on shows are there.
That's awesome.
That there's logos on everything, readmes, in that kind of stuff.
So the Security Weekly account needs an icon.
Yeah.
I know the perfect one to use. The one
the one with the hair.
Yes.
The wig. Yeah. So we'll be working on that.
Mankini.
We're going to be doing, obviously more technical segments. And so it's about time we had a central repository for all that stuff.
That's awesome.
It was fun. We're going to continue it. Maybe in the future we'll give you an update on it. But you can get the script, do whatever you want with it with permission at github.com/security weekly. Sweet.
Cool.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back with the news for this week. Cocaine hippos is our squirrel story of the week. Stay tuned.